Hi, HR Nation. It's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, we have a special guest. We're joined by René Bujard, Global HR Director at Oxfam International. René, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks, Chris. Well, I'm doing very well. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Excited to be on the show.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really happy to have you here on the show, René. René, for our listeners, give them a little bit of an insight to your background personally and your journey to where we are today.
Sure. Swiss national, born and raised in Geneva, Switzerland. Had about 24 years of private sector experience with Procter & Gamble, always in HR. Worked in different countries, Geneva, US, UK, Belgium, Singapore. Left about 4 years ago, joined Oxfam, wanted an experience in the non-profit sector. Been with them for about 3.5 years. Just finished my gig with them yesterday, or day before yesterday, in fact. Taking a short break now before my next adventure.
Amazing. What was it like moving from to a non-profit, just out of curiosity, from a cultural perspective and a business perspective?
Very interesting, because from an HR point of view, there's lots of similarities. You know, it's all about people, it's all about talent, it's all about getting the organization set up in a way that delivers the results, people dynamics, budgets. You know, there's lots of similarities. And at the same time, of course, the purpose is very different. The decision-making processes are quite different because of the governance that varies as well, and the type of challenges. You know, when I said I'd been in Singapore, at the time I was with Procter & Gamble, lots of people were impressed because it was hard to get an assignment outside of Europe. Whereas when I said I've been in Singapore, to my colleagues at Oxfam, they laugh because their assignments are in Kabul and in Yemen and in Syria and in Iraq and, you know, all these places, and they go to rest and relax Singapore. It's a very different setup.
Fantastic. Well, we've both had a lot of conversations around diversity and inclusion over the last few months, right? And it's something which is now top of mind in HR. So I was wondering, just to kick things off in the conversation, why do you think D&I has come so much into the foreground in HR discussions over the last few years?
Yeah, I think it's been a growing trend for at least the past 10, 15 years, if not more. I think Europe came to it a little bit later than the US, because in the US it started with correcting the aftermath of segregation. We were a bit in denial in Europe, thinking it was a US problem and not something we needed to deal with. Because look, we've got a Brit, a Swiss, a German, an Italian. We're diverse. Not realizing that that's not what diversity is all about. I think also now it's become clearer and clearer that you grow your business results with more diverse organizations, and by being able to tap into that diversity better as well. So it's no longer a question. Suppliers expect it, clients expect it, boards expect it, you know, everybody expects it. And so it's something that is just a given, and organization needs to deliver on as well.
As you mentioned, now it's very much a buzzword in the HR world. What are some of the myths that versus realities that you've experienced in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, in general context, I think it's the most misunderstood and underutilized organization strategy. I think there's still people believe it's a numbers game. It's about making people happy. It's the nice, soft, and fluffy thing, as opposed to, in my opinion, it's the most potent organization strategy that leaders can use right now to boost the results with the people they have. You know, if you know about Gallup, talks about up to 70% of the workforce being not fully engaged. I believe that one way to do that is through more inclusive work environments and better tapping into who people are. So these are, there's some thoughts and ideas I've got along the way, and I thought I could share as well.
Go for it, René. We'd love to hear more.
I think, first, it's not just for minorities, it's for everybody. And until leaders say it's important for me and not just it's important for them, then they're not going to really get it. I think also that lots of people waste energy trying to conform to what seems to be expected to be successful. And so all this diversity that we bring in, people waste that energy instead of using all the energy to perform. And I think that's something that we can work on right now with the organizations that we have. It's about also recognizing that when we correct this imbalance that has been in place for decades, it is tough for both sides as well. You know, how many discussions I've had with people that when we try, for instance, to increase the number of women in management, then there's kind of negative reactions on both sides. You know, women worrying that people will think they've been promoted because they're the woman, and men saying, hey, it's unfair to us. And something I've learned along the way that we need to deal with that, because indeed there are positives and negatives on both sides. And how do we support the organization as we transition? I think also it's not just about training. You know, we tend to do a lot of go to this training, go to that training, and then thinking that will move the needle. I think it helps, but it's not sufficient. You know, it's the same as learning to drive a car. You don't learn to drive a car just by going to see a bunch of slides in a classroom. You need to go on the road, you need to practice with an expert next to you. They coach you, they guide you, and little by little you gain confidence and you're able to behave better. Or take Federer, you know, in tennis. If he wants to get to the next level, sometimes he's had to change his serve or he's had to change his backhand. But these are the things that got him to where he was before. So there's the fear that as I learn new behaviors, I will get worse before I get better. And I think a number of leaders, you know, are concerned about that as well.
Yeah, really good point you made, and you couldn't have chosen a better person like Federer to give a good example. Definitely my favorite. One of the me and Shane, we always say that he plays sexy tennis.
It is beautiful tennis as
beautiful,
well.
It's beautiful tennis.
And I think he's been willing to challenge himself, you know, and to change some of his moves.
He's had to evolve, hasn't he?
To be able to get to the next level and to be able to defeat new opponents as well. So absolutely.
But your point is completely valid that, you know, when you start any of this, you never, anything you start off at new, you're not great at it when you start. And you have to develop, right? When you could start anything. And it's the same thing when you approach this. And I'm glad you made that point. You know, a one-off training session with your leaders is not going to be a solution to solving this as well. It needs to be ongoing as well. So what approach have you taken then in your organization, for example, Oxfam and other companies you've worked in? How have you approached this?
Yeah, there's a number of things. Obviously, you need to engage management, and that's very important, as I was saying before. Where I've seen it work best is when management was committed to that and willing to work on themselves as well. And reframing the questions. You know, I always say we tend to approach a lot of problems looking for the right answer, implying that all the other answers are wrong, such as, you know, what 2 + 2 = 4, and all the other answers are wrong. Unfortunately, diversity and inclusion is messy. It's not these type of questions. It's the type of questions of what's the right temperature in this room. Well, there's as many right temperatures as there are people in the room. So how do you deal with that? Because still you can only have one temperature at the same time.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's developing inclusive processes that kind of get everybody to express themselves, and then, you know, doing the best to develop a solution or an approach or a way forward. It doesn't mean everybody gets what they want, but they feel like they've been properly included and considered, and you're likely to have a better outcome.
Mm-hmm. How did you first engage those guys? Was this one-on-one individually? Was it, you know, it's a team?
It depends. You know, obviously for me, it started with personality types, so Myers-Briggs or MBTI, you know, because for a while I thought, I'm less good than he is, I'm less good than she is, but so far so good, keep low profile, you know, keep doing what I'm doing. And then somebody said, oh, you should do this thing. I said, what does it do? And they said, well, it says how you are inside. And I said, I don't want people to know what's going on inside. You know, they'll know I'm not as good as or not the right profile, and they'll let me go. You know, until I did it, and they said, no, you're adding value because you bring a different viewpoint. You know, so that's an element of the diversity that is not visible. Obviously, you don't know in advance by looking at someone what their personality type is, but the behaviors, you know, can give you some clues. But when I found that out, you know, a weight lifted from my shoulders, and then I thought, I wonder how many people around me feel the same. You know, that they are not quite the right type. They need to adjust, to conform, and again, thinking about this waste. And so I developed this desire to develop the usage of the tool across the organization. I went to the VPHR for Europe at the time, and I said, I think we should train every HR person. We all need that in our toolkit. She said, great idea, but too expensive, find another way. And so then working with the suppliers at the time and other colleagues, and we developed an in-house capability structure. We now have more than 100, Procter & Gamble, I'm no longer with them, but there's a structure of more than 100 certified users in Europe, networks in Asia, in North America, and et cetera, growing across the different regions with capability and increasing levels of capability. And we have a small group of masters that develop new team events, because it's one thing for people to learn their profile, big group hug. Now I understand you better, Chris. I know why sometimes we don't get along. Let's go back to work. I then know it's the same as if you said, oh, we've learned Spanish. Now let's go back to speaking English. No, once you know about Myers-Briggs type or whatever, use it, And so these tools that we had, we could talk about leadership, about change, about decision-making, coaching, whatever was the challenge of that team, and use the investment that they had made to help them grow into that.
Do you see impact in the performance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we really saw people start to blossom and to feel like they were able to talk about themselves, be better understood by their colleague. I remember we were talking about one specific character in a senior leadership team, and I said, oh, that profile, their key value to the team is to pinpoint where the problem is, but that's how they add value. It's a good intent. They're not doing it just to be critical. And the guy said, exactly,
But no one knows that.
Always judged as the bad guy, the one negative and whatever. And suddenly, it kind of created a new dynamic in the team. Then I see that over and over again. It's very important, of course, to use it properly and ethically, but it's a very, very powerful tool, and it's useful. I've yet to see a case where one manager says, this employee is not doing so well, we need to find a way to separate them. Where if they had known about the personality type differences at the beginning, instead of spiraling downwards, their relationship would have spiraled upwards.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. When I first became a manager, I had all of these different personality profiles on my team, and I had no idea how I was taking a one-size management approach to everyone, and it's because I wasn't taught any different. And it was only a few years into my career where I actually came across the same thing that you just mentioned, and did ask each of my team members to take the test, and it came back, and I was like, wow, I've been doing this completely wrong. For certain people that were like, for example, introverts, I was like trying to manage them in a different way, and more people that were thinking more analytical, I was managing them the completely wrong way. So I was like, okay, I've got to really change the way I'm approaching this. But I'm sure there's many people out there that are still doing the same thing, right?
And it's also a great tool to engage traditional leaders like you and I, because when it's about gender, we say, oh, it's about them. When we say it's about ethnicity, oh, it's about them, or LGBTI or whatever. MBTI, again, type is for everybody. Everybody's got a type, and oh, look, I'm different on one letter, and so suddenly they feel part of the whole thing, as opposed to just doing something for others as well. So it's a great way to engage people. And again, it's part of diversity. Visible diversity is very important.
I like that, because no one really talks about this, René, which is great. I'm really the reason you brought this up, because no one talks about the non-visible diversity.
Yeah,
it's not really a conversation that's had really as much. But I didn't even think about it in that way myself personally, if I'm being honest, until you brought it up, until I saw your details you sent over. I was like, oh yeah, of course. Like, it wasn't something that came to front of my mind even. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are exactly the same. So what other areas are you currently focusing on?
I mean, what's interesting as well is a lot of the diversity question is about power differentials. It's about some people are in power, have historically been in power, and design things in a way that works for them. And whether intentionally or not, that has excluded others who are not in power. Whether again it's gender, race, ethnicity. I believe it's the same for personality type as well. So I was always looking, where we have pockets of people that feel maybe less included than others. Some of them, you look around, and some of them talking directly to staff as well. So we created a LGBT support network as well. There was one in the US, but there was nothing in Europe. So started that in the UK when I was there, and got it started, and it started pretty well. And then I had 2 years assignment in Singapore. When I came back, they said, hey, we friends, colleagues in other sites in Europe who would like to do the same. Can you help us? And so I became the sponsor from an HR point of view across Europe. And when I left, we had 10, 12 other groups in different countries as well. And again, lots of engagement events with our colleagues who are LGBT, but also allies and others, and that created a new dynamic, and quickly looking how we can use that to help us with the business as well, and to better understand this group of our consumers, and maybe better communicate with them as well. So it's also making the link between the staff and the staff experience, but also our consumers.
So just out of curiosity, how did you justify, obviously internally, how do you justify the costs involved in putting this together in terms of measuring the success of these type of activities? Because I'm sure that's very difficult to do.
You need to start with a context where management says it's important. And at some point they realize it's an investment and not a cost. But of course you need the budgets for some of the activities. You start little, and in the beginning we begged and borrowed. The sponsor of the group, when you find a senior management sponsor, of course they don't want to appear like they're doing less or less well than their peers who sponsor other groups. So somehow they find somebody from their budgets, and until you can create a budget that is part of the overall framework, that is standalone, that is, and once you have it in place, it's easier to renew it from 1 year to the next. But start little and start growing as well. It doesn't have to be very expensive in the beginning. What's important is to create the safe space where people can talk, and to properly support it and manage it so that it doesn't backfire.
Do you find that once you create those spaces, safe spaces, that people naturally want to lead it themselves and take ownership of it?
Yeah, and you've got all styles, so you don't want to force everybody to join it.
That's what I mean. It doesn't feel like, you have to be part of that.
No, exactly. So it's very important to, and some people say we don't need it, because it's okay for us and it's already a very inclusive environment, and that's fine. So I'm not saying you need these support groups everywhere, but we found that where there's been cultures that have not been so inclusive, it helps to have a safe place where people can go and exchange their experience and realize I'm not alone, others feel the same. But also you can then prepare a dialogue with the other group. And that's where I've seen the most powerful outcome of such work is when you're able to have, again, an open but safe dialogue with the other group where both parties can understand. I remember one case where we were working with a group of middle managers, and there was this discussion about gender, and it kind of wasn't going anywhere. So finally, one of the guys said, okay, fine, let's just talk about that. And he went like that, and he laid back, put his hand behind, and the woman said, exactly, when you sit like that, show you don't care.
Oh, God.
And he said, oh, really? For me, when I sit like that, it means I'm totally open, and I'm not kind of, I'm stopping to try to interfere or to put all of my weight on the whole thing, and I'm ready to listen and to absorb. And the coaching was, again, the misunderstanding maybe of the body language, but also the signals we might send to others as well, and how we need this space to be able to discuss about that. So that took us to the next level. Again,
but that's why it's important to have those breakthroughs and those interactions, because if you don't, you never know, and your opinion will always be built on assumptions, and that's not good.
No.
At all. And a lot of, as that leader said, most of us aren't aware of.
We're not aware, and that was the next big learning, which is that in most organizations, it's no longer the old-fashioned isms, as our consultant called them, where people are openly racist, sexist, homophobic, or whatever. You will find that in a lot of organizations. Of course, you might have the whole spectrum of opinions and values, but in general, the large majority of people have values that promote equality, and they want to treat everybody the same, and don't have an issue with that. That's where you get into the unconscious bias, which the consultants call the modern isms, where you still may treat people in a way that is not inclusive, but not intentionally. And so the learning then is what to do about that. And I remember an activity we did, it's called the Power Walk, where you say people stand on this side of the room and then walk to the other side of the room And you say it's a silent activity, just observe, so walk to the other side of the room if you're female, come back. Walk to the other side of the room if you're ethnic minority, come back. And you cover all these different aspects of diversity, and then you debrief at the end, and I remember one guy saying, I never got to walk to the other side of the room, almost feeling a bit excluded from the whole thing. And I said, well, one thing that you may want to consider, is the less time people have walked to the other side of the room, the harder it may be for them to understand the experience of being in the minority, because you never experience it in your life or at work. Whereas those who get to walk many times to the other side of the room, first, somehow it suddenly makes them a bit more visible, and it's not to finger point, but it's to say, hey, these are people who have different experiences, and they're likely to understand all these dynamics because they've lived them, for many, many times.
It's a great exercise for everyone listening, by the way.
Because self-awareness, very important. Everybody should invest in that. That's, I believe, something we can all do. I mean, the other thing I believe we can all do as HR leaders is invest in ourselves as well. I think as HR leaders, we know that it's not because someone is appointed manager, suddenly they're good at managing people. I mean, you described your own experience just before. Well, it's the same that with HR. It's not because someone is HR that they're naturally good at doing diversity and inclusion. This is really something one needs to invest in, learn, go at it very humbly, and start building the skills. It's fascinating. There's a huge amount to learn. I think I'm still, on a long journey. I don't think it will ever end, but we need to invest in it. It's really critical. We need to be able to support and facilitate that in our organization.
Yeah. Do you structure the learning for yourself? Do you have a particular time that you set in your diary, in your agenda, where you have some me time, some René time? Because I think a lot of the HR leaders, they're so busy sometimes in the actual, they're in the moment of doing doing their job essentially, but they don't sometimes take time for themselves to step away and reflect and look back and focus.
Yeah, it's a good point. Actually, I think for me now, I've developed enough self-awareness that I'm always thinking about it.
Okay.
So I'm always kind of meta-processing in the back of my head what's going on and trying to be sensitive to the power dynamics in the room or in the meeting or whatever. But where I think we can add value is in coaching managers, because I was giving you the experience of learning to drive a car. Well, if we best want to have managers, we need to be able to sit in the meetings and then be able to debrief right after the meeting, if possible, with the manager. Did you realize when you said that, how it, could have been, did you see the body language change in these people, and often they will not, because as you said, you're in the moment, and even it can be right after the training, they took the training, then they go to a meeting, and they behave as if they've never took the training, and people will say, well, what's the point?
But they don't know.
Yeah. they were not sincere, they didn't mean it, and it's not that they were not sincere, but in the stress and in the speed of the moment, you can't certainly change your behavior. So, but getting the feedback right after, if possible, it's even better if it can be done in a meeting, if you created a culture and a context that makes it okay. But people might hesitate to give feedback to the boss, because you never know what the consequences could be. So the role of the HR could be this, safer place and person to give, and then, you do it 2 or 3 times, and then the person will think, and they may, over time change their behavior as well. So I think getting that type of reflection time is very important. Again, where I see it work best, that was a big investment, but we had consultants coming back for 2 days every quarter, and we took the whole management team off-site for 2 days, and we talked, what did you try to work on this past quarter, what worked, what didn't work, doing a bit more kind of, a mix of theory and activities, and then, okay, try to practice that this next quarter. That was over a 3-year period. That's a big investment, but again, if the HR person is trained, you can do it in the moment and as part of the daily life as well. So it's doable as well.
What did you discover in yourself, René, as your own unconscious biases? Because we all have them, right?
Yeah, and I think, first, again, we're all educated and we are learned to analyze situations quickly and make up our mind. And I discovered I made lots of assumptions about people or about motives that people might have had for saying something, for doing something. And I've learned to always go back and even ask the why. because two people might do the same thing for different reasons as well. So that's one thing I learned. I learned also that I'm a guy who likes, to help people be successful. And sometimes I might do what is called rescuing, where, because of who the person is, let's say, one simple example is you have two people in your team, you have a big project to do that will be super strategic, visible, and all of that, but it requires a lot of travel. And you've got a young mom who's just come back from maternity leave, and you've got this single bloke. And you might say, oh, I'm going to be a great inclusive leader. I'm going to give the project to the single bloke, because I want to help. That's rescuing. The right approach is to talk to both and say, this is what's happening. This is, the requirements of the job. And you might find out that she would love the job, and she's set up to do it in a way that she's got, the arrangements at home to look after the baby. And the other bloke might be single, but I don't know, might be the coach of a football team and might be really devastated to let them go and not be able to be present. So not making these assumptions and not doing this rescuing in advance, which I saw even myself. I said, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that in myself as well.
That's a great example. I'm glad I asked that question now, because we all do that, don't we? And it's important just to take the time to just have that conversation, or just ask the question, as opposed to assuming that based on what your knowledge you have, that's the right decision. Because as you said, that individual may have taken it in a really bad way and said, what, you didn't send me because I'm a female, or it could have gone really wrong on the other way around. And similar with the guy as well, he may have said, oh well, I didn't really want to do the travel in as well because I have this planned. So it's great that you've that you have that, and now it sounds like you're self-aware enough to have that conversation internally before making a decision the next time around.
But still needing to involve the people, because the dialogue is very important.
Of course, again, yeah.
On assume and or even minimize the impact of the difference as well. And that's another thing I've learned as well, is sometimes, it's not because this person is from this or that type of background, it's their poor performer. But maybe we don't realize that they are not performing in the way we expect them because of their background. I remember the case where we had transferred some people from India when we had shut down our technical center in India. And we were hearing, the consultant said, oh, you have a problem with racism in your site. And I said, what do you mean, racism? Absolutely not. And then I went back and I said, no, I've talked to the people. They all said there's no problem with racism. And they came back and they said, no, we didn't mean racism as in the old-fashioned way I described before. But they said, when we talked to the people, they said, I don't think I would have been promoted to my level if I had been in the UK at the time. And the managers would say things like, they're great people, you give them a project, they do super well. But I don't think they've got leadership potential because they're very quiet in meetings. Finding reasons why, but not understanding that the reason is actually because of the cultural difference and not being aware of the cultural difference. And once both parties realize that, suddenly, several people got promoted in very shortly thereafter because they gave themselves permission to, kind of adjust their behavior because they realize you need to speak up in this culture. You can't wait for your turn to speak. But others also being more inviting and saying, hey, what do you think? And kind of giving them this space and this opportunity to step in as well. So it's, again, a little example, but the other ones that can easily trip us.
Yeah, and that's going to be different depending on the different cultures that exist within your business all around the world. So I'm sure this is already happening in so many different organizations that are missing opportunities in their businesses as well. So very, very important point. And back to the self-awareness point quickly, René, because I speak to a lot of leaders who they want the feedback. They say, they want their employees to give them more feedback. But however, they're not presenting themselves in a way that people feel comfortable giving it. So how did you create a culture where people feel open to giving each other feedback?
Again, it depends and it varies. When you create that space where the team steps out of the office and you need to agree some ground rules in how this is going to be done, and then it's possible to do it. But again, you need to have created that space. With another team, we used the Stephen Covey leading at the speed of trust, and which kind of breaks down trust into 13 different components. And I asked the team to rate themselves and to rate each other on these 13 components on a scale of 1 to 5 to give me all of their, so it was anonymous, they all gave me their stuff, and then I gave everybody a report where they had their own self-assessment and the average of the rating that the team gave them, and vice versa, you know. So, and then we had a discussion. I said, let's talk about it. And I prepped the senior leader to say, maybe if you come first, that will help create a space where it's easier for the others to come in. And she came in and she said, wow, I rated myself much higher on this measure than you guys did. Can we talk about that? And that gave them permission to say, well, you know, this is an example, etc., etc. Another way could be, of course, to do it, you know, in writing and to ask, again, the HR manager if they could do one-on-one interviews with different people in the team. You know, that's if people really feel uncomfortable, even to put it on a 360 performance feedback. So leaders will have to do it. I mean, you're right. You know, I've heard leaders say, but I always tell my door is open if people want feedback, and nobody ever comes.
Yeah.
And not being aware of the power differential. You know, again, if you're desperate for a promotion and you know there's only one promotion and there's 5 worthy candidates, you're not going to take any risks.
No.
That could hurt that, you know.
You said be aware of the numbers, you know, not as
I think
progress,
you know,
I think it's
this
an important
is one
point.
of the sticking points because, you know, quotas versus numbers, you know, and I think lots of people are resistant to that because they don't like the idea of quotas. You know, and I think, again, the execution needs to be suitable for the particular culture where people are. But whatever the choice, at least track the numbers, because the numbers tell you whether you're making progress or not. Look at the distribution of, you know, the various variables, whether it's gender, whether it's ethnicity or others, at the different level. Look at the resignation or turnover numbers, you know, if you have equal numbers. Look at the promotion numbers. Look at time it takes to be promoted to the next level. So what some of the key metrics and seeing if there's a difference. And if there's a difference, then why? I wanted to do that for MBTI types as well. You know, I thought maybe people with my profile or some of the letters in my profile have less chance to be promoted because that's not what's expected or rewarded in the environment, and are we losing out there as well? So I think it's important to look at that. Again, not say we will only be satisfied when this number is achieved, but seeing is the trend going in the right direction or not. After that, what is the right mix? I mean, I've been in organizations where we're way over 50% female in some functions, like human resources, for instance, or you know, communications, media, etc. Is that bad? I don't know. You know, certainly we like a good mix, but it doesn't mean that the only right approach is exactly 50% everywhere. I think when it becomes too cookie cutter, too mathematical, then that's where it gets wrong as well. But when you see certainly numbers go really different on one side or the other, whether it's turnover, whether it's distribution of performance ratings, whether it's promotion rates, whatever other metrics, then it's time to say, what's going on there?
Fantastic. Well, René, that leads us quite nicely onto our quickfire round, where I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you have no longer than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Are you ready?
No pressure.
No pressure. Everyone says that. René, what was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a senior HR leader?
Good question. Obviously, I don't know that I was really held back, you know, because again, I represent the majority, but it was getting on the right assignments, you know, and not being scared to take the one assignment that didn't look sexy or popular, because that's actually where I got my biggest experiences and what we call accelerator experiences. So, you know, it's, let's say, the daring to take the assignment that doesn't look sexy. Yeah,
those are the moments when you learn the most, right? And it's important that we always challenge ourselves to keep progressing. So thanks for sharing that. What's the best piece of business advice that you've ever received?
The very first advice I got from one of my managers was that policies are there to help the business, and if they don't help the business, then they need to be changed. You know, whereas initially I thought it's like Holy Writ, you know,
governing body, yeah, exactly, yeah.
And you still have a lot of, I would call, old-fashioned HR managers. Their default answer to any question from staff is no, unless I have to give it to you per policy. I believe in modern HR where the default answer is yes, unless it's against our values and principles. And so knowing we can challenge and change policies, I guess, was one of the best advice I got.
Great. What's one book do you would recommend to our audience and why?
Anything that takes you out of your comfort zone and gets you to discover something that's very different from what you're used to. Yesterday, I went to kind of an open event for alumni of the university I went to, but it was about investing in robotic startups. I'm not an investor. I'm not looking to go into startups at this stage. Certainly, I have no knowledge of robotics, but I keep hearing how artificial intelligence and robotization will change the world of human resources. I said, let's go and have a look at what it's all about, And certainly, these type of things open up one's mind and allow us to look at the world a bit differently as well.
Any books that you've read on a similar point of view?
Not directly on
machine learning and AI, but I mean,
no. But I try to pick nuggets. I went to a book launch earlier this week in London, which is called One Life. It was about one work-life balance and finding ways to look at it differently as well. And how it's a challenge for men and for women. It's for instance, and it's a quick example, but. Obviously, a lot of the initial work on that was about allowing women to manage both families and careers.
Yes.
But the reality is it's to help both, and you hear a lot more about paternity leave and all of that now.
I'm going through it right now myself.
There you go.
I've just had a baby and
you guys are role modeling that, because society has forced both genders to make terrible choices for centuries. Because yes, women had to choose, and if they had to choose, they were expected to choose family over work. But men have always had to choose, and were always expected to prioritize work over family. And nobody thought the less of that, And I think now it's giving us permission as well to say, hey, I care about my family too, and I'd like to spend time with my family too.
Yeah.
And now we're really in a space where we can do both. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Could you share one internet resource that you use to stay up to date with current events, stay connected, or for your own productivity?
I look at the news, and again, I look at different newspapers that give me different contrasting visions, because I think it's important to understand how the other people think, those I may not agree with. But otherwise, one internet tool I've used a lot, which is linked to personality type, is called Type Coach. It's type-coach.com, and I like it because it's very simple language, and it can stay with people when I'm done with my job of facilitating a session, because that was always my frustration. I train people, I give them all that, and then they go back and they forget, and they remember something incorrectly, and then that can cause more damage than nothing. So that's always there. They can do type comparison with each other. They can you can create the type table of the whole team, and so it's one that I really liked and go back to.
Great. I'll certainly link that up for everyone. And what's one thing about your business that you're most excited about today? I suppose you're taking a break, but
right now it's the world of possibilities, and looking what's out there and what's possible. There's a lot to be done. Certainly for me, one thing that has been, I don't know that exciting is the right word, but for the last 6 to 9 months, I've spent most of my time and energy on creating safer work environment for everybody. And I give external conferences on that. And I believe that's extremely important. And it's happening everywhere. As we know, looking at the press, it's not just the charity sector, it's every sector, every industries. In fact, what I tell people is while you're in this webinar or workshop with me, and maybe while these people are listening to this podcast, someone in the organization is being harassed or possibly abused. Are we ready? Do we have the right policies? Have we created a culture where it's safe for people to come forward? I think we can all raise our games and all do better than what we're doing today. So that's certainly something that has kept me going and that I want to continue to invest in wherever I am.
Fantastic, René. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us on the show to share your knowledge and experience with everyone. I know they'll be a lot better off for it. So thank you so much for that. Before we wrap up, René, if there's that one piece of parting guidance you can give to our audience, what would that be? And also, what's the best way for them to connect with you if they wish to reach out and have a conversation with you directly?
Well, the best guidance is reach out to people that you don't know well, that including in your organization. I always liked to go and connect with the people that are always critical, because I believe that they hold me accountable and they help me be a better HR leader. But I've learned that I also need to talk to the quiet ones that don't speak, but may also have a lot of value to add as well. Especially again if they're quite different. Contacting me, well, you can put online my email address, my phone number. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and my contact details are there too. So it's easy. It's René@bujard.eu, and I'd be very pleased. Actually, I love being contacted by others and seeing how I can help. I believe we should all help each other, and we're not competing there, but we're there to create better environments for everyone, everywhere as well. So that's why I'm here, and I'm very welcome.
Amazing, René. Well, look, for everyone listening, guys, head over to hrdealers.com as always. There'll be the show notes from the episode, everything we're talking about. I'll throw a link in there to René's profile on LinkedIn, so you can go there. I warn you, René, you're going to get a lot of messages, so be prepared. And I'm really excited for you. Keep me updated on your new journey, René, and I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Thank you very much, Chris.